Good morning and welcome to the first annual Enterprise NG Conference. We thank you for joining our public Angular keynote today. We're all still adjusting to online first interactions, and ng-conf is your partner here. Today, Jules and Misko are going to share with us what the Angular team is working on and what they're focused on. If you like what you see and you'd like a ticket to the rest of the show, tickets are still available online this morning. And over the next year, ng-conf will be hosting a series of events. Please consider joining the community at those events as well. And now, here's Jules Kremer and Misko Hevery.
Hey everyone, I'm Jules Kremer. I'm an engineering manager at Google responsible for Angular. And I'm so excited to welcome you to NG Enterprise. Although I'm very, very sad that we are not here all together in one place. I will miss the hallway tracks and getting to see familiar faces and meeting new ones. I'm even going to miss the likely late night rehearsals Misko and I would have been doing in the hotel room, getting ready for this session today. I'm coming at you from the beautiful island of Maui in Hawaii, which is not a bad place to be stuck during this strange time in our world. And today I wanted to spend just a few minutes with you. I'm going to give you a high-level overview of how Angular fits in at Google and how where we fit in organizationally helps to support the most essential goal we have around Angular, which is the evergreen nature of Angular itself. We know how important it is to bring developers and the ecosystem along with us as we evolve, and we view this goal as the most critical of our objectives. While being evergreen is a goal, we also know that we have values that help to guide how we're taking Angular forward. And we try to keep these values in mind over everything that we do. You may have seen or heard us talk about these values in the past. They've been consistent for a number of years. We actually recently spent a couple days talking about these values, trying to determine were they still true for us. And after that work, we decided these are still the core values of the Angular team. We want to build a framework that generates apps that users love to use, and we want developers who are building those apps to love to use Angular to build them. As an open source framework, community is very, very important to us, and the value of inclusivity is at the cornerstone of our community. We want Angular to be a community where everyone feels welcome wherever they are in the world. Along with these core values, we have a set of principles or a set of Angular strengths that we believe are the foundation of Angular. And so everything we think about in terms of the future of Angular needs to stay true to these strengths. To be an opinionated, batteries-included framework that comes with best practices and well-integrated tooling. Before we released Angular back in 2016, I was actually the head of DevRel, and I spent a lot of time out in the community talking with folks, many of you here today, about what you would need from Angular. And I remember the CIO of one really big company, who's probably in the audience, telling me how critical opinionation was to his team's ability to meet the demands of their company. And for him, scalability was also a factor, and opinionation really helps with scalability. Because for many businesses, right, or just writing code, some apps usually start small with small development teams. Maybe you're prototyping with 1 or 2 developers. And then these apps grow, and as the source code grows, so does the size of the development team. Angular's opinionation helps with scalability, as all those apps that you're building as you bring new developers on board, they look familiar. The code is recognizable, the structure is recognizable, and the tool chain that you're using is recognizable and consistent. This tool chain often comes from us via the CLI, but there's also many, many partners in our thriving ecosystem, which is also a strength of Angular. There's everything from state and data management to education and training providers to component libraries out there. And we try to nurture this ecosystem as we bring Angular forward. And then finally, there's that core strength, the one I want to focus on today, which is Angular being evergreen. And what we mean by this is that we enable you to stay up to date with the latest changes that we introduce. And we have this concept on Angular called feature drops that we share a release, and you get to take advantage of all the newest stuff by simply running ng-update. And this ability to seamlessly update and get all the latest goodness is in large part enabled by how we fit organizationally into Google. So I want to spend a few minutes chatting about that. And then I'm going to hand over the talk to Mishko, for he can fill you in on where we're taking Angular in the future. So as with any business, large business, Google is organized into groups, and we call these groups PAs, or product areas. There's Google Cloud as a product area, for example, and Google Ads as another example. You might find it interesting or even odd that Angular was originally part of the Google Ads PA, and this was because Angular originated out of a need for a scalable framework to power some of the largest apps that drive the Google Ads business. As Angular became more and more popular at Google, being a part of ads made less and less sense. So after Angular gained a lot of internal momentum to the point where we are today, the most commonly used web framework at Google, Angular was reorganized in order for the team itself to work more efficiently, more importantly, to be able to work with others who also care about web development. At its heart, Angular is a team that is building infrastructure for the development of web applications. So it's different than building a product where you might find in the Google Cloud PA like Cloud SQL or Gmail. Angular is building the tools that developers use to build products at Google. So as such, we've moved into an infrastructure organization called Core, and within Core, we are part of a group called Core Developer. Every team within Core Developer is focused on one goal, and that goal is to make Google class development fast and easy. For teams within Core Developer that have an external community, such as TensorFlow and Firebase and Angular, we extrapolate this goal to make Google class development fast and easy to the rest of the world as well. Within Core Developer, we are part of Core Developer Web, and our teams are responsible for most of the infrastructure regarding web development at Google. Within our org, we have two groups: Web Foundations. These teams are where you'll find our Build and Serve or testing team, some other open source teams that you might recognize like Clojure Compiler and SAS. You'll also find the Google TypeScript team here that is responsible for the TypeScript compiler at Google. You might even recognize some of the members of this team, as the TypeScript team was incubated within Angular, but then as its momentum internally took hold and thousands of lines of code in TypeScript now exist at Google, that team became part of the core infrastructure and moved over into the Web Foundations group. We also then have web frameworks. That's what I'm responsible for. So that includes Angular and our sister team, WizStar. This reorganization has allowed us to work more closely with all these other teams that are focused on the web. We reduced our redundant efforts. And in my opinion, the most valuable part of this reorganization is our ability to now collaborate with our peers and others that think about the web space on a daily basis. As a few examples, members of the Angular team have recently spent cycles with our colleagues on the WizStar team, thinking about how to evolve templating languages. We did some work about how to evolve component foundations, as well as thinking about production services for Angular apps internally, and then how the tooling around that might work for external production systems as well. As a web framework at Google, we are responsible to support every single project that uses Angular at Google. This report requirement is not just for Angular, it is for every team that provides infrastructure. And so this isn't an easy task, right, for any team, but what does this mean for Angular specifically, and why would it matter to you? That's what I'm going to talk about next. So we launched Angular about 4 years ago. I'll never forget the date because we launched it on September 14th of 2016. September 14th also happens to be my birthday, and so I'm always caught saying that aside from my last birthday, which was my 50th, the best birthday party I've ever had was the launch party for Angular. Since the launch, we've seen a tremendous growth internally as well as externally, but here I'm focused on internal usage of Angular. As I've mentioned, Angular is the most commonly used web framework at Google. We've seen about 1.7 times growth in the number of apps in just the past year, leaving us at about 2,600 or so Angular apps at Google. As you might know or have heard before, I know we've talked about it in previous keynotes, Google uses a monorepo. And if you've never read much or don't know much about the monorepo, just Google monorepo. There's some really great content out there about it. But it's this internal system, the monorepo system, that helps Angular to be stable and evergreen. As part of the monorepo, we know which projects are dependent on Angular, and we have deep insights into those projects. So when we push an update, the build system compiles all of these projects and verifies the project CI, which passes and which don't. And so we can see if we're going to break something before we do an external release. We can respond to those issues and fix them before you would ever see those in the public versions. Sometimes we do actually want to break Angular. But we know that if we do, we're responsible for all those 2,600 projects. At Google, if you break it, you fix it. And so we use automation in these cases to transform projects and migrate them to the latest versions. And then this automation works its way back to all of you via ng-update. And this stability and the automation and the particular view we have of all 2,600 apps gives us a sort of intimate knowledge of how Angular is used, its edge cases, the use cases, any issues that might be, its strengths, right? And this really allows us to have a different perspective of Angular that you might find elsewhere, and it helps us to innovate and define best practices and then integrate all of that into our tooling. So all of this together, the stability requirements, the automation opportunities, and these app insights, this is the foundation for Angular's greatest strength of being evergreen, and this is how we ensure all of you take advantage of the newest versions of Angular by simply using the ng-update command. We think of this as a key unique value proposition of Angular, since most projects usually have a fixed version of the framework and a combination toolchain that you put together yourself. For Angular, as part of our batteries included platform, we want to deliver all of that to you via the simple CLI command of ng-update. So that's just a brief little overview of how where we fit organizationally in Google's monorepo helps us stay true to our evergreen goals. One of the other questions I've been asked a lot over the last number of months are, who are Angular stakeholders? Who are you building this thing for? And what do they want? So at the root, Angular stakeholders are the users of web and the web applications on the web, and the developers who are creating those. But obviously that's millions and millions and a lot of people in the world, right? So let's narrow that down to something that we can work with. So if we narrow that down, we have two main stakeholders: the millions of developers in the external world and the thousands of Google engineers working internally on the monorepo. As you might imagine, even with that many stakeholders, there's a lot of use cases, industries, and workflows to support. So a question that I'm asked is, what do these users want, and how do I manage their incoming feature requests? Where do I look for them? Do you email me? How do you give me that? So as an open source project, GitHub is the main avenue for product feedback and issues, and we've been really amping up the team's focus on triaging and making sure that GitHub issues are well managed. Also, we have a lot of relationships with our customers. We do one-on-one customer meetings, both internally and externally. We talk to people at conferences in the hallway track. Feature requests come from these relationships and just from having all of these customers in the world. As well, we have a tremendously amazing group of Angular GDEs, or Google Developer Experts. We routinely dip into that well to ask for feedback, to give us, try our new releases before they're out kind of thing, test messaging. GDEs are an invaluable source of requirements for us. And then also we do surveys, and we do surveys internally and externally and try to mirror these so that we can see the difference between these two main groups of stakeholders. So if you see an Angular survey come out, we would really love it if we get the most responses to that as we can, because this survey really helps us with our prioritization process that I'm going to talk about in just a minute. But I wanted to stop because you're probably thinking feature requests in terms of engineering and product features that we could build into Angular. But it's really important to note that our investments are not just with the features of Angular itself, but we get requests for community programs, such as the recent request for comment program that we instantiated. That's been a request from the community for years. We get requests around documentation, so building new guides or building guides around integration with other products. We also have our own infrastructure, right? We have a dev workflow that we need to support, and we have projects around that. So for example, how do we move code from GitHub into Google's internal monorepo? How is our own CI and testing landscape looking? And then finally, we're a team of humans, and you need to bring humans together, both to have fun as well as to have time to visualize the art of the possible or to think about things in the future. And so we spend time also ingesting team projects that the team wants to do together. And so, it seems daunting to put all these on slides because that's a lot of requests, and figuring out how to balance them is really, really hard. But one thing that has become clear after years and years of filtering and hearing input is that we've noted that in terms of these two main stakeholders, there's not a lot of difference between Google engineers and the Angular developers like all of you out in the external world. So we know that our sweet spot, or where we should most heavily weight our efforts, is in this Venn diagram's middle place, right? The things that meet both communities' needs. And so we call this the sweet spot strategy. And along with our core values, we use this strategy as a foundation for how we think about evolving Angular forward. Speaking of, probably the most requested feature over the past number of years that I can remember has been for the Angular team to release its roadmap to the public. And while we've always had a workflow for our internal tracking purposes, we've not historically done a great job showing all of you where we're going. So earlier this year, probably one of the biggest changes that we've made to Angular was actually to the process and the workflow we use as a team. So just after Angular 9 was released, we implemented a new prioritization process that we codenamed ng-elephant. This work has led to the public release of our roadmap that you can find at Angular.io. To get to this roadmap, every week the tech leads and engineering management get together to prioritize all the incoming work. These sessions are collaborative, where everyone has room to provide an opinion, to discuss, and then together we provide a ranking to the new project. Sometimes that means we have to move things down. Sometimes that new incoming request may have such urgency that it gets a spot at the very top. We are trying to update our roadmap quarterly, so you'll see this movement in the roadmap. And I hope that this gives you an understanding of how we sit in a room and decide how to put that together using the lens of our values, of our sweet spot strategy, and that evergreen desire we have to drive Angular forward. So I'm hopeful I've given you just a slice of how I, as an engineering manager, think about running the whole of Angular, how us fitting into Google aligns as an infrastructure team and allows us to really support that common or key goal of being evergreen. And now I'm going to hand it off to Mishko, and he's going to talk a little bit about Angular Ivy and where we're going from here. Thank you so much for having me. I hope to see you all next year live in person.
Hello, my name is Mishko and I work at Google on the Angular framework. Today I would like to talk to you about Angular framework and also about how Angular team uses its core values in building a product which users and developers love. First, let's start by celebrating our achievements and reflecting on how we got here. Ivy was released at the beginning of this year as part of version 9 release, and by all measures, it has been a success. We have heard a lot of positive feedback from the community. Our main metric is that it was a smooth transition. For most developers, the upgrade went without a hitch. Secondary benefits come in the form of size and build time improvements. We are very proud of that. We have worked very hard on Ivy as we think it will allow Angular to remain competitive for many years to come. While the project currently is mostly feature equivalent to Vue Engine, it lays the foundation which will allow us to deliver many new benefits in the future and remain innovative. Shipping such a complex rewrite would have been impossible without the benefits of Google's monorepo. Every change which lands in Angular repository must not break any of over 2,600 Angular applications which are currently existing inside of Google. This gives us tremendous amount of confidence that any change we do to Angular will work for you too. You can think of Google's monorepo as the ultimate test suite. Additionally, we have collected many of the external most common Angular libraries and tested them with Ivy to make sure that they work. This is why the transition went so smooth. While we had a strong focus on Ivy, we have collected some technical debt, which we are hoping to focus on in version 11. Ivy took over 2 years to develop. Part of the long development cycle was to focus to make sure that it will create the least amount of disturbance to existing applications. And we have succeeded in that. So let's see what we are focusing on next. Version 11 is on reducing some of the technical debt which we have accumulated. No fancy features, just bug fixes, performance, and more. Byelog is our internal code name for triaging issues on GitHub. We spent as much as 70% of our time focused on this activity. By doing this, we hope to gain insights as to which areas of the framework we should be focusing on next. We use this information to prioritize which issues we work on next so that we can deliver the most value in the shortest amount of time. We have made some great progress in this front. For example, we have fewer than 15 untriaged issues and components. We have triaged hundreds of issues to get to this point. Because of this process, we're able to resolve some of the most wanted requests on GitHub. Let's look at some of them now. Here are some examples of issues which have been resolved. Notice that all of these issues have high community engagement and as a result benefit a lot of people. This is an example of lazy loading module and named outlets in routes not working properly. And since we were working on router, we also took care of related issues which allow our developers to build more cohesive story and more router work. But router is not the only thing which we are focusing on. Here's an example of a highly desired fix in forms. And finally, we were able to solve the third most upvoted issue in our repository around internationalization. This issue is asking to be able to translate not just templates, but also strings inside of your application. Not everything is a template. For example, calling alert with text also needs to be translated, and until recently was outside of the scope of Angular. This issue is a perfect example of how Ivy is helping us to make more agile as a framework. Being third most requested issue clearly shows how important it was to the community. The fix was non-trivial with Vue Engine, but became straightforward with Ivy. We expect to have many more of these kinds of wins as we start taking advantage of what Ivy enables. Let's have a closer look at the internationalization. With Ivy, the internationalization pipeline has been completely reworked, resulting in key new features for you, our developers, as well as your users. The new IATN can run in both compile as well as in runtime mode, in contrast to Vue Engine, which only supported compile time. We heard this request from our developers and we delivered on it. Many of you have custom ways of storing or processing IATN, and as a result, runtime solution is a better fit for some of these use cases. This feature is implemented in such a way that if you choose compile time, your runtime part will automatically be tree shaken away, making sure that the resulting bundle is as small as possible. The new IATN is now unified between Angular templates as well as strings needing localization inside of your application. Again, think about how you would localize a text which you have to pass to an alert function. This means that you can have single IATN solution for your application, whereas before you would need two solutions, one which Angular provided for templates and one which you would need to provide for the rest of your application. The area where we are most proud of is time savings in IATN compilation. In Ivy, the build times for each additional language locale add only minimal overhead, whereas Vue Engine, it resulted in a complete separate compilation pipeline execution, resulting in some serious time savings, in some instances saving as much as an hour of compile time across all locales. The compile time IATN also has better support for lazy loading so that only translation strings which are needed in the current lazy loaded chunks are loaded. You can learn much more about this effort in this wonderful blog post by Pete Bacon-Darwin. In this blog post, Pete talks about how the new system works, what kind of benefits the new approach brings, how the improvements were made in ways in which are backwards compatible, and how we got such significant speed improvements at build time. Pete was also provided significant implementation muscle behind this effort. Thank you, Pete. This is a statement which no developer has ever made. Builds bring a lot of benefits, and this is why we tolerate them. But from time perspective, we always want to get all of those benefits faster. This is why a lot of what we do is to focus on build time. Not just build time for small applications, but also build time for large applications which may have hundreds of developers working on them. Improving build performance is always something which we focus on. We were able to get a lot of wins in this area because of something we refer to as Ivy locality. It is the idea that when the compiler runs the execution, it should only have access to local information, never global information. By adhering to this mantra, we can compile Angular components incrementally in Ivy, rather than a single compilation at the very end, as was the case with Vue Engine. The amount of compilation needed is proportional to the change introduced in the codebase, rather than the size of the codebase. The focus on locality has created many benefits. Let's look at some. An example of such an improvement is ng-cc. ng-cc is a compatibility compiler which takes code from npm, which was compiled with Vue Engine and translates it into something which Ivy can understand. NGCC runs as part of your npm install and can take some time to execute. With version 11, the NGCC is now up to 4 times faster than it was in version 10. Many thanks to Joost, who spent a lot of time profiling the tooling pipeline and time to understand both micro and macro level to figure out how best to make it faster. His hard work has really paid off and shows that Ivy is enabling a lot of places where we can do better. Make sure that you're keeping up with the Angular releases to take advantage of these wins. We spend a lot of time making sure that your update experience is as uneventful as possible. As part of the work on the Angular compiler, we have discovered places where we could make improvements in our upstream tooling, and namely TypeScript. Joost worked with the TypeScript team at Microsoft to improve TypeScript compiler and to upstream these benefits. TypeScript team will release most likely as part of version 4.1. This is a great example of how focusing on a problem and going all the way down a rabbit hole can benefit not just Angular developers directly, but also non-Angular TypeScript users as well. Faster builds are good, but not hot module reloading is better. Hot module reloading allows us to update only what has changed in your application without forcing you to do a full refresh. The result is even faster development cycle. The faster the cycle, the more productive that you, our developers, can be. The standard development experience is to change code, recompile, and refresh the page. With hot module reloading, you can change the code, and our development server will recompile just the piece of code that you changed and pushed only the changes to the browser without forcing you to do refresh. This results not only in faster development experience, but also less distracting one, as you can focus on problems at hand without breaking your flow. Hot module reloading has been possible in Angular for a while now, but with version 11, we have introduced an HMR flag which configures the development environment for you to provide a better on-ramp for more developers to take advantage of this more efficient way of developing your application. Few other things which are coming in the future. Ivy language service preview. Our language service, which plugs into many popular IDEs, provides code completion and type checking for your favorite editor. The current version of language service runs on top of Vue Engine and as a result has all of the same limitations as Vue Engine does. Namely, the type checking does not fully work in embedded templates. With Ivy compiler, the type checking is greatly improved, bringing these benefits to code completion as well. These benefits will be rolled out slowly and incrementally in future releases, but you can try it now in version 11 as an early preview. We work regularly with Webpack team to share knowledge and make sure that we are aware of each other's roadmaps. As part of version 11, we will be shipping Webpack version 5 preview to collect feedback from the community. This will allow you to take advantage of the latest and greatest tooling which Webpack has created. The main benefits expected are around improved Webpack caching, which should result in faster builds, module federation, and better tree shaking. We have been working very closely with the ESLint community. In particular, many thanks to James Henry, who implemented a great path for migrating existing projects using deprecated TSLint to community-supported ESLint. This is an entirely community effort. On Angular team, we have been providing some guidance, but community did all the work. As part of version 11, you will have a migration path to move from a deprecated TSLint to ESLint. And as we mentioned, we have plenty of long-awaited and highly desired bug fixes and other improvements. Let's look at a longer-term horizon of what we are working on and what you can expect next. One thing which doesn't seem as a big deal at first, but we believe will bring speed improvements to your first content paint, is optimizing block resources. When the browser loads the application's HTML, there are strict rules about when it is possible for the browser to render HTML per browser standards. The standards say that the browser has to wait with rendering until the style references above the HTML are resolved. This means that many CSS references will become blocking in practice. Analyzing the CSS and extracting only the relevant styling information and then inlining the styling information with the HTML can have dramatic improvements for the first content paint benchmarks. To achieve this, Angular team has been working closely on a weekly basis with the Chrome team to make the web better. We have been discussing on how to automate such improvements for Angular users and in the process, explore many different strategies. The strategy which we have settled on is this. Angular statically analyzes the component templates. From those templates, Angular extracts references to the CSS and builds up a map of which components need to know about which style information. Angular then uses this map to inline the desired styling at compile time. Finally, the rest of the styles can be loaded lazily after the first page load is complete and rendering is done. With some early benchmarks, we're seeing improvements as high as 3.7 seconds for the first content paint. This kind of improvements is something that Angular team is very excited about, and we hope you will be too. And because the Angular is evergreen, you can get all of these benefits with minimal effort on your side. We strive to make sure that the above command upgrades your code base to the latest version of Angular. It looks simple and innocent, but there is a lot of technology packed behind it. In its simplest form, it installs the latest version of Angular in your project. But it does much more. As Angular team deprecates APIs or changes how things should be done, we bundle automatic code refactoring operations to this command. The result is that when you upgrade to the latest version of Angular, we not only download latest bits, but also change your code base to stay compatible with the latest API and best practices. This feels like magic, and we are very proud of this. Here's a list of things which we are investigating and may be coming up in Angular's future. Webpack 5 Module Federation is promising to bring better lazy loading and more fine-grained lazy loading to your application. This would further help improve application startup time and responsiveness. Angular DevTools is something we'll talk about next, so I'm going to defer the discussion for now. Optional ng module is something we have been giving a lot of thought. The goal is to simplify the learning journey by reducing the number of concepts which you have to know to get started. One way to achieve that would be to make modules optional. Zoneless is a very cool piece of technology which allows you to not have to worry about when Angular needs to update the UI. Zone.js is magic, which makes the data binding just work. However, Zone.js is not free. It has a payload cost, runtime cost, as well as it tends to err on the side of caution and executes change detection way more often than it needs to be, just to be safe. If you want to run Angular and want to minimize the number of change detection cycles, as well as to build the leanest application, then Zoneless may be something of interest to you. Okay, let's talk about DevTools more in depth. You are probably familiar with Chrome DevTools extension called Augury. It was developed by Wrangle.io, and it shows you the application structure, injector relationships, and other insights into how your application is running. Because of their expertise, we are partnering with them to develop Angular DevTools. This is an effort in a very early stage, so we can't make any promises, but we can show you some of the features we are in the works. What you see here is a component explorer. This allows you to see DOM tree, as well as see which components and directives are attached to which locations in the DOM. You can select a particular component and examine its properties, and then interact with them, and then see how those changes reflect your application. If you have used Augury, you should be very familiar with this. On top of the Component Explorer, Angular DevTools provides a profiler. Here you can see which components are running change detection, when and how these change detection cycles spread across all of the components and directives. You can also see the source of the change detection triggers. You can then see how much time your application spent in change detection, lifecycle hooks, or application code, as well as frequency of these changes. In 2019, in Angular Connect, I gave a talk on how we are making Angular fast. The continuous focus on memory pressure, as well as writing code in a way which makes it very easy and performant for VMs to execute. The result is that Angular can be performant even on low power and low resource devices. You can think of this as our focus on micro-optimization of the framework so that each change detection cycle is as fast as possible. But all of these focus on micro-optimization may be missing a bigger picture. As I said earlier, Zone.js is what allows you to not have to worry about when Angular needs to update the UI. However, Zone.js does not have perfect insight into your application, and so it errs on the side of caution and overcalls the change detection. If you want to build an application which can get you the last ounce of performance from your device, then taking change detection into your own hands allows you to macro optimize the application. Zoneless is our exploration into how we could give that developer more control over when the change detection happens. By doing so, we would be able to reduce the number of change detection cycles significantly. So a good way to think about it is that Framework does a lot of micro optimization, and Zoneless will allow you to do macro optimization. This is still in a very early phase, and we have more details. We will be sure to share them with you so that we can get the community involved. Now let's talk about steps we're taking to make the community even more welcome by giving them visibility into what is going on and what our thought processes are. One of the main questions we have heard from the community is that they don't know where Angular is heading. We worked hard to collect all of the work which we have been working on in a single place and publishing it in Angular roadmap. This was a hard effort because the web is changing very fast, and there are many requirements which are being placed on Angular from both internal customers as well as external community, and all of this has to happen parallel as we are working towards keeping our existing commitments. The roadmap is shared on Angular.io for you to explore. Our plans are to update the roadmap quarterly so we can keep the community informed and involved. We invite you to go and explore it. To continue our inclusivity, we started a new RFC process where we both communicate to the community our plans as well as invite the community to give us feedback about the direction. So far, this process has been piloted on 2 RFCs. These RFCs have proven very beneficial as they have uncovered a lot of valuable and insightful feedback for us, and at the same time made the community more informed about the direction we're taking, but also about the deep resources which oftentimes may not be obvious behind the choices, deep reasons which may not be obvious behind these choices. The first RFC we piloted was about distributed format of the Ivy libraries. The RFC represented technical reasoning about the direction and invited the community to discuss. It has received over 100 likes and over 500 replies demonstrating the value of these discussions as well as the community engagement. The second RFC was on Angular CLI side and was focused on eliminating rendering blocking requests, which we have discussed earlier. It too has drawn an excellent community engagement with over 55 likes and over 25 comments. Our plan is to do more RFCs in the future to keep the community engaged and informed. I hope I was able to show you how we prioritize our actions and around our core values. In review, we want to focus on our users, our developers, and our community. We focus on our users by making sure that Angular applications are fast and feature-rich. We do this by building features into Angular Framework, which makes it easy for you, the Angular developer, to build world-class applications. Features such as internationalization, making sure that applications run fast, that the binaries are optimized and small. We achieve these through collaboration with internal Google teams such as Chrome, as well as external teams such as TypeScript and Webpack. We focus on you, the developer, and we focus to make sure that your developer experience is great. Things such as faster build, better NPM publishing formats, easy upgrades, focus on API stability and documentation. Finally, we focus on a community by providing ways to engage and inform the community. Things such as publishing a roadmap, creating an RFC process, and focusing and burning down issues on our backlog. We want to build Angular together where everyone feels welcome.